Great. So I'll just take a minute to tell you all a little bit about Nays, because I don't think he's going to tell you himself. So Nays is an amazing photographer and filmmaker for those that don't know him already. He was always inspired by the Blue Planet as a child, and is a graduate of the Australian National Film School. AFTRS? Is it AFTRS? Is that how we pronounce the acronym?
We can do AFTRS. We're
AFTRS, okay. He specialized in both cinematography and photography since he was 18, and has now showcased for Cressy, Deeper Blue, Molchanov's Freediving, Adreno Spearfishing, the Northern Beaches Council, Master Liverboards, and Arctic Adventures. He's an experienced freediver and diver. We've been lucky enough to do some of his training here at Dive Spear and Sport, which has been amazing. And he also operates as a coach and teacher for beginners in underwater photography and videography. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nays. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute myself here and pop over to hand it all over to you to get started. Like I said, guys, if you have any questions at all, please pop them down in the chat box and we will get back to you. We will bring them up as soon as we can. All right. I'm going to be quiet now. All right.
Sweet. So thanks so much to Carmen and the crew at Dive Spear Sport for having me. This is a bit of this is my first ever webinar for underwater photography. And what I wanted to do was to share 10 secret tips and tricks that I've personally found the most helpful for me in the 3 to 4 odd years I've been doing underwater photography. And I want to focus on a lot about the passion behind it, as well as the creativity and the theory and technical stuff that's required to be an underwater photographer. I know that we have some underwater photographers here, but there are some other underwater people who might be new to it. So this is just kind of something that's for everyone, and I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, let's go into it. So the first tip that I wanted to share with everyone is to get inspired by images that speak to you and the image photographs of the greatest underwater photographers ever. And when you look at these images, I want you to ask yourselves things like, what stands out? How are they manipulating color? What is the backstory that they did to get this photo? What are they doing with composition? Stuff like that. And there are a lot of photographers to go from. It can be a little overwhelming at times if you're on Instagram, like, who's the best one? And I don't really have a particular favorite photographer, but my favorite one at the moment is a guy called Alex Dawson. He's done a lot of work with National Geographic and a lot of commercial brands. And the reason why I like Alex's work, this is his photo right here, is because he shoots a lot on wide angle lenses, which I do too. And the way he gets the images on camera it's such an amazingly clear and crisp way. So if you're on Instagram, just type in @AlexDawson and you'll see a lot more of his work. And this particular photo right here was taken in Greenland, where this is a mutual friend, Anna von Bodecher, who's free diving for 2 minutes under this massive sheet of ice. And I just like how it looks like another planet and the color is just popping out. So that's tip number 1. Study all these images and just figure out what's making it work. And just another note, because I do video as well, Blue Planet 1 and 2 are also huge sources of inspiration to me. Whenever I often watch both of them just before I go out into the water, because I like to get that little fix of inspiration before I go out. So tip number 2, which I cannot stress enough, is be a good diver before being a good photographer. Because shooting underwater is a completely different ballgame to shooting on dry land, and it's a lot tougher, you need to be well-rounded to a range of environments and specialties. And it really helps to just get in touch with get your skills on point and just really spend a lot of time nailing down the skills. I remember actually, since this is a dive sport, I was getting ready to go to a trip to Iceland. So I asked these guys to take me do a dry suit course in, has anyone ever been to Taylor's Point? There's one. So Taylor's Point, if you haven't been to, is a shallow 3-foot area of water where it's incredibly hard. And I'm in a dry suit, so it's an incredibly difficult thing to just master your buoyancy. And sure enough, I had to do that months later when I went to Iceland. So basically the point is that make sure you just really do a lot of drills and training before you put a camera in the equation. And sometimes I'll have periods where I'm out of the water for months at a time. And what I usually like to do is before I have to go and shoot something, I just do a baby test dive in a shallow shore dive to make sure, is the equipment working? It's kind of like reactivating all those muscles and just getting in touch with the dive technique before you shoot it. So tip number 3 is make sure you know your camera inside out before you put it inside a housing. And that's usually what I've done with all the last 3 cameras I've had: a Red camera, a Sony camera, and a GoPro. Is that I just walked around the house or on the beach just playing around with it before I took it on, get the hang of it and know where the buttons are. And my current camera when I shoot underwater is the Sony a7S II. So what I did is I just figured out, like, where's the ISO button? How do I change gears? How does the battery work out? Where is the SD card? Just basic stuff to know like that. And I learned the hard way on one job that diving with an unfamiliar housing is a really bad idea. So just make sure you know your equipment really well before you go into it. And it's not just where the buttons are, but also how to do specific techniques, like how to format the memory card or change the aperture, which I'll get into later. But it's basically just know your camera before you go in. And continuing on that point of just knowing everything on dry land before getting in is it really helps to just study the theory of underwater photography and shooting underwater before you buy an expensive housing, because it's really complex shooting underwater compared to on dry land. Because on dry land, you've got tripods, you can talk, there's light, but underwater, all of that goes away and you have pretty much little to no control. So it really helps to just study certain things, like how, like for instance, one thing that really spoke to me was how when you're diving down, red light just disappears and you really have to use light to compensate for that, or have a sensor that compensates for that. And we have this expression amongst us, which is a great photographer can make a shot on a cheap $500 camera look fantastic, and a bad photographer can make a shot on an expensive $5,000 camera look terrible. So if you are new to underwater photography or videography, I would really recommend starting out with a camera like the GoPro or a Paralens camera, or even the Olympus TG5 compact camera, because those cameras are very basic and rudimentary in what they can do, but they are really good for just understanding the basics and shooting underwater. And they really make you focus on things like composition, light, and being in the right place at the right time. This shot of the blue grouper on my PowerPoint was actually done on my GoPro, and it's actually a video screenshot that I just edited afterwards. And it's just proof that if you want to start out, and also if you can't afford to get a big Nauticam setup, you don't really need a massive setup to do that. So that's tip number 4. Theory first, gear second. And this goes into tip number 5, which is it really helps to shoot raw and to shoot manual. Now, what do I mean by shoot raw and shoot manual? RAW is a file type for cameras that records a lot more information and metadata than a normal JPEG file would type. And if you know how cameras and computers have evolved in the last 20 years, you'll know what I'm talking about. And basically, a RAW file gives you the flexibility to make a lot of adjustments in post-production that a normal file wouldn't necessarily offer in terms of flexibility. And although RAW files can eat up your hard drive space a bit, it really does make the difference. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up Lightroom and just do a live demonstration of the advantages of shooting in RAW. So I'm just going to move this here so I can see what I'm doing. So Daniel, who's actually on the call, shot this shot. So shout out to Daniel Williams for doing this. And basically, you'll notice if you look at this photo, it's a little overexposed. The color's not necessarily great. So what do you want to do to make it look more striking? Well, what you do first is you do exposure, but first I'm just going to do a little crop. And the reason I'm cropping is because the light on the area underwater is a lot different to lighting up here. So you just crop it here, and I'm going to lower the exposure down because that just looks a lot cooler. Maybe bump up the contrast. So this is a really important tip, is just make sure you get the light right first before you start goofing around with color. And I want to go for something a little moody. Bring the shadows down. I'm not going to touch the color tones. So this is a little light, but you'll notice that my face is a little underexposed here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a mask. Now a mask is a little digital circle that just lets you do a whole bunch of different things. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this little area here a lot brighter than it actually is. So just going to increase the exposure a little bit. Saturation. And you'll notice that it looks a little pink. So you'll notice that the lighting is a lot better than it was before. And now that we've got the lighting a little better, what we're going to do is we're going to move into color. So I really want that blue to pop out. And a lot of underwater photography is just pushing around with it and just testing out things before you find that little sweet spot. Now the greens are a little better. Let's see what the yellow is like. That doesn't look good. I want to get that really orange feel, so I might just do that a little bit. But it's not really popping out, so I might just lower it a little bit. Go to red. And that's what happens if you push it too far. That just looks weird because no one has orange lips like that. So I'll just make the orange a little more to the red side, more luminant. And there you have it. So that's how I would never be able to do without the assistance of having a file that just lets you control. Because what the camera does is that it records information like highlights, shadows, and you'll actually see here, like if you notice ISO 32, that's something that only a raw camera file will record. A JPEG will not tell you information about what the original settings of the camera are like, but it really comes in handy. And even if you have a JPEG, it can, let me just get this up. I'll just go to a recent trip I did to Southwest Rocks where if you notice the color was really, hold on. So you'll notice that this is just a normal green color, just absolutely disgusting. Nothing you can do. 4 meters. What do you do? So I'm not going to demo this one, but basically this is the result that came up with the new one. So if you notice here in the settings, what I did is I compensated for the loss of red light and amped up the blue and just played around with lots of different lighting here, like making the fish brighter. So this is something that this is why I would highly, highly recommend Lightroom Classic. If you don't want a subscription to Adobe, I would also recommend a software called Luminar if you have a Mac. Luminar is good and it's a one-off payment, but I find that Luminar is not as versatile and flexible as Lightroom, but they're both good options as far as I'm concerned. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to Keynote one. That's it. So that was my point about how shooting raw and also shooting manual, because shooting underwater is just such an unpredictable thing, it really helps to have a lot of versatility and options at your disposal. And that's why I recommend shooting raw and shooting manual. I just heard that the GoPro Hero 8 actually does shoot raw photos, which is a really good thing. So if you're going to buy the new GoPro, it will give you that flexibility in editing it in post-production. So tip number 6, which is a bit of a controversial opinion, is I really think zoom lenses are the key to being a versatile underwater photographer. And the reason it's a controversial opinion is because most people argue that prime lenses are a lot better in the quality and the way the glass is arranged as opposed to zoom lenses. But the problem with primes, which are basically fixed length lenses, is that they can't account for the unpredictability in the movement of objects underwater. Whereas with a zoom lens like this one, you've got a lot more versatility. Like this is actually the lens that these two photos were shot on. So if you notice at the top, I'm on the widest setting, which is 16 millimeters, and you can get everything in, the pylons, the diver, to get that wide sense. But then if you want have something like an octopus that's nestled in and you want to zoom in, you've got that flexibility as well to do. So one question I commonly hear is, what's the best zoom lens to get underwater? My personal recommendation for Sony, Canon, and Olympus and Nikon cameras, I think, is the 16 to 35 millimeter lens. And as I said, it's just because everything refracts underwater, 16 to 35 is a really good lens that takes that law of physics into account. So that's my personal recommendation. Now, on the same note of gear, tip number 7 is to really memorize the checklist of everything that goes into preparing an underwater housing, because you don't want to show up in the water and think, oh dear, I left the lens cap on, the SD card's not working, the batteries are dead. So I cannot stress enough, just get everything prepared methodically beforehand and just make sure that you're all soon. And what I also wanted to do in this presentation is to do a live demonstration of what I do when I'm setting up my personal underwater housing from scratch. So I'm just going to move this here. So this is the housing for my Sony a7S II. It's in 2 parts. This is the housing for the body of the camera without any lens. It's in 2 compartments, which is the little back control panel. And I'm using a Nauticam housing, and the advantage of Nauticam housings is that you can control every single button if you want to, which really has saved my neck on multiple occasions while shooting underwater. So that's that. And then there's also, and it's a little bit of, see, goes in that. We also have the port, which, because I have a wide angle lens, you have a big glass cover on it. Now, glass is one of the options you can get. You can either get acrylic on it, but the reason why most people shoot glass is because the quality of the image is a lot better. The only risk of shooting on glass is that it's more susceptible to getting scratches on the glass dome, and they are almost impossible to get off. That happened to me once, and I still have to suffer from that occasionally when I'm doing it. And the port goes on. That's locked. And I always keep the little dome cover on beforehand, because sometimes I knock it about and I just don't like that happening. So that's the housing. The second component is assembling the camera. So you've got the camera here, the lens, and in order for the lens to work underwater, you need a little ring that goes onto it. So I'm going to put this on first. You make sure that it's just moves all the way. The gear goes on, and this is something that I've made the mistake of doing, is sometimes the gear is not on properly and I can't even zoom properly, which can be a real pain in the ass when you're shooting, but that's working. And then there's also, which is the little guard that goes underneath. It's kind of like the tripod, but for a housing, this little thing. So this goes on here to control the lens and just to hold the camera, because if you have a loose camera in a pressurized housing, it will just not seal properly and make your life a bit of a misery when you're shooting. So you use that to undo the lens, the sensor cap. Same with this. Now, notice how there's a little white dot here and a little white dot here. So that is essential for getting the lens on.
Sorry, Nays. I'm just going to stop your screen sharing.
But when you hear that click, yeah?
So I'm just going to stop your screen sharing for a minute so we can blow up your screen and see properly, because it's a little bit small, if that's okay.
Sure, how's that?
That's better. Beautiful, so we can feature you. Amazing. Is that better for everybody? Just give me a thumbs up if they can see better. Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks, Nace. And then just reshare your screen when you're ready again. Thank you.
Okay, can you see that okay? cameras up. How's that? Good? Okay, so I'll probably just switch this so I can see, so you can see the camera better. So we've got this on, camera's working. Now, what we're gonna do is that we take the little, the back off, and this goes into, I usually like to be sitting down. This goes right in. So you need to hear a little click before it goes in. So that click is in. And now this is for the other part, which is this thing. And now we put this on. Now, one other thing is to put the vacuum on. See this little blue light here? What that's going to do is that's going to show me that whether my housing is properly sealed or not. And what we'll do is, now this is what why I recommend naughty cam housing, is because they offer the option to pressurize the housing so that you know for a certain fact that it will not leak at 100 meters depth. And when you buy a naughty cam housing, they usually give you a little bicycle pump that helps in doing that. So what I do is I put this in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it so you can see the changing light here. So you'll notice it's turned back blue. So I'm pumping. Notice how it's now changing yellow. And now it's a green color. So this little green light is the camera's way of telling me that there's no chance it can leak whatsoever. And then you put the little dot back up. Now, there are 2 more steps left for the housing. The first one, which really comes in handy when you're doing boat dives, I find, is the lanyard. So this is a night scuba 27-inch lanyard that I think it's about $30 or something, which goes onto the little clips here. And the reason that these lanyards are really good is because not only can you tie it to your BCD so that it will not go away in the big swell, but also if you can only have one hand, you just hold it like this and it goes here and like that. And I also have dive lights that I use to make sure that I'm lit, and I just check the battery here. Bright, isn't it? And this can do red, ultraviolet. That's that. So I'm going to switch back to the camera now. So that's the big tip I would recommend, is just getting the hang of your checklist. And the other little thing I would recommend is that sometimes if you're doing a dive, the conditions can change at the last minute. So usually if I'm about to go on a boat, but I hear, oh no, there's 3 meters swell, it's rainy, the viz is 2 meters thick, then I just won't bother preparing it at all whatsoever. And now we're going to segue into a different part of the presentation, which is we're not in the dry preparation phase any longer, but now we're underwater and we're actually ready to shoot. What do you do? So the first thing that I do before I even attempt to take a shot is I just observe the environment first. I'm actually just going to turn this off because this is now depressurized. Bear with me. So I'm a bit of an observant person who just likes to pay attention to little details. So the things I look for include, like, what is the light like? How are my subjects looking and behaving on camera? Are they close to me? Do I have to worry about my safety? Do I have to worry about the worsening conditions? And I find that if I'm trying to answer all these questions while I'm trying to get the shot, not only do I feel like I'm distracted, but I also feel like that it kills my relaxation when I'm underwater, because I like to be in that Zen state when I'm with a camera and just completely focused on what I'm trying to do. And the other reason is that it's already a bit of a chore to just like fiddle around with the settings and get everything right, that you don't want to add a second complicating factor into the equation. And I also just think that because we're just so overloaded in general with like social media, phones, work, and that kind of stuff, it helps to just give yourself a minute or two to just savor the moment of mindfulness before you get thrown into the fast-paced nature of underwater photography, because that does happen to me a lot. And I find that when I'm concentrating, it's not only feels fast-paced, but also I tend to lose my air supply a lot faster than I would if I didn't have the camera. So yeah, make sure you get a sense of your surroundings before you start getting the photograph. And tip number 9 that I want to share is one of the most important things to keep into consideration is the concept of composition. And it usually helps to come up with the idea of what kind of a shot you want to get, but you have to kind of be adaptable to what happens when you're at the dive site, because things do change. And for those of you who don't know what composition is, composition basically means how it is composed and the way everything's arranged. And a common rule in photography, which most photographers abide by, is what's called the rule of thirds. Imagine if there are 2 horizontal lines going down and 2 horizontal lines going 3, and you have 9 squares. And what you have to do with that rule is to position the important elements in line with those lines and at the points where they meet, which I've demonstrated in this little photo right here. And this is something that just takes many hours of practice before it just becomes like second nature. And tip number 10 that I want to share is a lot of photographers make the habit of just getting lazy with their settings and just thinking that they can solve everything in post. And as an editor, there's nothing that pisses me off more than the expression, let's fix it in post and just do an okay job and expect everything, because it just doesn't work that way whatsoever. And if you can get the perfect image while you are underwater, that means that your editing process is minimal. But also there's just something interesting about the purity of having the image just exactly as it is. If you look at this image, this is exactly how it looked like on the day. The hue of the little blue ocean in the background, I only tampered with mildly, and the lighting in this photo is barely touched. Like the shadows aren't even that noticeable. But if you can get a perfect in-camera image, then you're doing the right thing. And a bonus tip, have fun. Underwater photography is an objectively fun thing to do, no matter if you're a hobbyist or a professional. And even if you're doing a basic photo or trying something that's completely whack and just experimenting, take joy in that. It's a really fun thing to do. And it's one of those 2-for-1 cases where you get dive and you get to do photograph in one combination. So please if you're not having fun while shooting underwater, then you're in trouble. And one concept that I didn't cover in the 10 tips, because that was just kind of more like things that aren't really discussed, but this is just something for people who might not necessarily be fluent in photography, is there are really 3 elements in photography to consider. There's the aperture, which is how big and closed the lens is. And it also means how much detail there is in the background. And I'm going to show examples later, but if you look here, it can get like brighter and brighter and darker and darker. And these are all relating to the exposure, the brightness of the image. The shutter speed, which is how fast or blurry an image looks, is also dependent on light. And if you notice just like the little differences in the examples, you'll see that. ISO, which is the third one of this triangle, is how noisy or clear, crisp the image is. And usually if you're pushing it into 4 digits or 5 digits. It's a pretty dark environment that's compensating for it. But those of you who do photography, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm just going to show serious examples of some dive sites in Sydney where with the particular settings in this triangle to show you what they mean. So if you look at this image in Chowder Bay, this is a little common octopus. I think his name is, I can't remember what his name is, but he usually sits under the pier where the fishermen are, minding his own business. And you'll notice that I'm really close up to him. So this is what I was talking about earlier, which is I'm right at the end of my lens at 35mm. I'm at f5, which basically means that the rest of the background is really blurry and it's really focused clearly on the octopus. The shutter speed is in the middle. It's about 1/100th of a second, which is crisp enough to get the image. And the ISO is grainy for normal cameras, but for a Sony mirrorless, it's nothing at all. But it basically means that it's a little dark underwater, but it's doing the job to get the light that you need. And by the way, all of the dive sites that I'm showcasing are run by Dive Spear Sports. So once this madness with the coronavirus blows over, you'll be able to dive all these spots with the folks there. So this is at a place called the Pinnacles, which is right at the top of the peninsula of the Northern Beaches. And this is an instance where I'm right wide out at 16mm. You wouldn't notice it here, but I want to get all of, this is max right here. And you'll also notice that I'm at f11, which is right in the middle between focus and really wide. So, and also it's the same shutter speed as before, but also the ISO is a little lower than before because it's a brighter time of day. I'm close to the surface and you don't need to make it as bright as you would in a murkier environment. This is at the one and only Shelley Beach. And this is something I've noticed a lot when you're doing scuba diving there, is usually you're on the closer end of the lens to get in closer. And you usually go up to f4 so that everything's blurry in the background. And this is actually interesting because it was so bright. You'll notice that the ISO is 100, which means that because it's bright, I don't need to compensate for that. And the exposure is working a lot. And the advantage is that you'll notice the image is really crisp. So there's no grain chance of it being grainy whatsoever. We actually have someone here. Claire is in this photo. Wave everyone, Claire. And you'll notice that because Claire's quite close to me, I'm closer to the 20mm end of the lens, but I still want to focus on her. You'll notice that the background's a little out of focus because I'm at f5.6. And usually if you're at 1/200th of a second or ISO 800, those are what are usually called the standard settings in photography and videography. So, and by the way, I'm not really conscious of these settings at all when I'm shooting underwater. I just simply focus on one individual part and just usually keep a standard set and just adapt as necessary. This is probably my favorite dive site in the entire Sydney region, the HMS Adelaide. And what's interesting is that I'm really deep at this one. This shot was about 32 odd meters. And because of that, I'm at f4, which is the brightest the aperture can go, which means that it's letting a lot of light in. I'm not ridiculous with the shutter speed. It's right in the middle. And the ISO is now in the 100th category, which means that you need to let in a little more light. And yeah, that's it. Any questions? I know we had a few coming into the chat, so I'll just have a look at that now.
Yeah, we had a couple here, Nace, that I've got. Claire asked one. She asked, Claire, if you want to unmute, you can ask yourself.
No, I just wanted to know what brand you were using for your lights, Nace.
Oh, good question. When I started, I've had the same brand of lights for 3 years, and I use a brand called We Find Smart Focus Lights, which are more for video lights. So these lights are about the size of a soft drink can, and they're pretty bright, but they're not as bright as other lights. But what I like about them is that they're very simple to operate. The battery lasts long. They're not ridiculously expensive. And the other thing is, because I shoot a lot of video, probably more than photos these days, is that I prefer having a continuous light. I'll just demo it so that it's not super bright. So I like having a light that doesn't go, because I find that that's really distracting for the divers and the animals. So I just like having these continuous lights. I'll just also just go in closer so you can see the exact name of it. So we find Smart Focus 2300 lights. This is, I wouldn't say that this is the gospel light to do. Like, there are a lot of different lights that are really dependent on what you want to do as an underwater camera person, but those are the ones that work best for me personally.
Thanks.
Thanks, Claire. The next one was Juliana. Juliana, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I hope that's worked. Oh, yeah, cool. The microphone's working. I was just wondering, how heavy is your rig and does it affect your buoyancy?
Great question. The housing that I have right now is about 6 to 7 kilos, and it's not too heavy after you take it for a walk a few times, but when you're in the water, it's a little on the, it's neutral, but it can be on the positive side. And usually if I have lights, it's right perfectly at neutral. And I think that Nauticam housings are really good for buoyancy, but sometimes if it's not right, what you can do is you can add little weights or float arms to do it. But I was really lucky that when I first put it in, the buoyancy of it was just perfect for what I was meaning to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Nace. And the next question is from a handle that I don't know, 1RW, et cetera. Do you want to just unmute yourself?
Oh, that's me. I don't know why I didn't come up. I'm Elisa. Hey, Nace.
Hey, Elisa.
Hey, Elisa.
Do you remember when we were in Galapagos and we're doing negative entries? If you had your rig with you, what do you typically do with it when you have to do a negative entry?
I'm right-handed, but I usually hold the housing with me. I leave the dome port on, and I've got it in my left hand and my regulator in my right hand, so I can keep my mask and reg in. I just roll back in, and then by the way, I also have the little lanyard clipped onto me so that there's no chance of it going away. So I keep holding on. I often switch hands once I'm in the water and then use my left hand to dump my BC and then descend. I've still got the little dome cap on because sometimes it just gets damaged. And then once my buoyancy is sorted and I'm sinking down, I just take the little cap off, put it in my pocket, and then continue with the dive.
So do you also tuck in all your strobes and stuff, so it's fairly compact when you're doing the back roll?
Yeah, I often have my, I actually will demo with one light on what the lights are like. So this is what a full arm looks like. This little thing in the middle is not only helps connect it so I've got more length, but it also means that if I want the buoyancy to be mitigated, then it just floats up a little and it can make it less negative. But these are called float arms. So what I'm doing is I'm undoing the little clamp here, and that goes in. And then it's just putting this in. By the way, if you played Lego a lot as a kid, you will really enjoy underwater photography, because that little knack for just building things and just doing that comes really in handy. So obviously this is one light, but this is just really compressed down and a bit like built like a tank. So that's what I do with the lights when I'm doing a negative entry.
Cool.
Does anybody else have any questions for Nace? No? No? All right. Nace, I think you answered everybody's questions a little too well. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Did everyone feel they got something awesome out of that? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, awesome. That was seriously good. I got some really, really great tips there. So thank you so much. Just any last words, Nays? Any last advice? Any last tips to anybody if you were to give them one last final piece of advice that's not in the presentation? Nays?
What, sorry?
Sorry, I was going to say, any last little piece of advice that's not in the presentation? Little personal touch on it.
I would just say that I'm having massive withdrawal symptoms because I can't dive because of what's going on. But
Absolutely.
I would just say that if you're like me and you're suffering from that, I would just go in the bathtub and pray. No, I'm joking. If you're a beginner, just play around with the camera and just get the hang with it. If you've got a new camera system and you haven't taken it underwater, but let's just hope that this madness goes away quickly. All right.
100%. Well, look, there's lots of thankses to you in the chat. So, Nays, thank you. Nays, thank you so much for that. That was just awesome. Guys, just if any of you are looking to do any sort of work around this or I think post-production and things like that, Nays actually offers like essentially classes, aren't they, Nays? They're like can you just explain your program a little bit, just if anybody is interested in doing a bit more one-on-one with you?
Yes, sure. I do custom one-on-one coaching that is really personalized to what your skill level and what you're looking for as an underwater photographer. And I offer a 30-minute session to get to know you and figure out what you're looking for. And then if you want to keep going, then I just coach you on a weekly or fortnightly, depending on your availability. And I just help you get to where you want to get.
Awesome. So if anybody's looking for some extra coaching, if it's something that you want to do, reach out to him. He's got his Instagram's at Nays Baghai, Baghai. Same on Vimeo and also website as well. So I'll put all of those links anyway onto the Facebook page and Instagram and stuff so that you can click through. So thank you very, very much. Just big clap. They're all on silent, but we can hear them. We can see them all. We can see them all. So thank you so much. And thank you very much to everybody for attending today. I hope that you enjoyed it. And we're going to be doing a lot more, you know, a lot more different presentations and events through Zoom. So, you know, if you enjoyed this, be sure to, you know, keep an eye on some other topics and some other presentations that we have coming in the really near future. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming along, and see you at the next one. Thank you.